We are here in Nyon at Festival Visions du Réel à l'usine à gaz, and we are very happy to meet Sebastian Mez. Yesterday was the first screening of your film, The Great Void. We're going to talk a bit about this film.
Hello everybody, thanks for having me here.
From the very beginning, we understand a bit the concept because, we see abandoned places or places that normally are without people, but then we start to understand that actually there are places where also normally people are. So how was your concept?
Well, I think it's very important at this point to make it clear that most of the images in the film were not filmed during the pandemic or during the lockdown or during the morning hours. It was filmed in the middle of the day at rush hour. And most of the footage I filmed in 2017 and 18. And what I did was I removed all cars and all presence of human beings, like people walking on the sidewalks and in the background. I removed everything digitally. So the idea was to create a kind of dystopia that doesn't look really like a dystopia, because in general in the history of and in the film history, the idea of abandoned cities are always accompanied by a disaster or something that happened. But I really like the idea to create images that look as usual, like nothing happened, like the daily life in the city, but something is strange because it's also silence. There's no one moving, nothing, just the trees, the wind, some birds that are flying. And I think the timing of the film now maybe is not the best, because everybody would think, okay, these images were filmed during the pandemic, and I think we are also like a little bit used to these kind of images already. So these days I was thinking if I would have managed to finish this film like 2 years ago already, then I think it would have a different meaning. But still, I think it's also interesting that it is released now in this moment.
Bridges here.
The images are synthetic in a sense, that they are created. They are more expression of a will. The absence of the man is not just a fact, it's the expression of your will, so why?
Then I need to explain how these images were like created and at what point of my life, because I stayed for 3 months in Los Angeles in 2017 because I got granted a fellowship, an artistic residency, and so I knew that the city would influence the project that I would develop in that time. And then I was like trying to discover the city by walking with a bicycle, which is impossible in Los Angeles because it's so made for cars, and I was like really desperate at some point. Then I really had this idea, okay, what happens if I would see the same city without any presence of human beings? So basically I also removed the cars that are on parking in the image. So when people tell me, you filmed this in the morning hours or like during the lockdown, then I say no, but then you would still see at least the parking cars in the city, but everything disappeared. It's really just the city as it is. And after like working hours of removing the first images, suddenly opened a lot of things to me. It raises a lot of questions, because if you look at the images, I don't feel that I erased something or I reduced something. I think the absence of human beings enriches the image by creating a lot of thoughts, ideas, and you're looking out for traces or for something that you would recognize that give you an idea what happened or why the situation is as it is. So, and this was so interesting for me. It was like a long journey to finish this film, and I reconnected with the footage again during the first lockdown last year in Berlin. And actually the footage you see in the end of Berlin is the only footage that I actually really filmed during the lockdown. So this was like the circle closed and the project comes to an end. I mean, the structure of the film is based on the idea that, okay, what happens if someone comes to Earth and finds the place as it is? So for that, the film starts with this kind of landing on a planet that we don't know what it is. Is it maybe another planet? And then step by step you see the traces of human presence, but more in a way of like the deserted, abandoned places like you mentioned before, and then suddenly we are in the middle of the city and we realize, okay, no, it's something is not as usual.
Yeah, it's not just document, you search. So your position is, and probably the position of the viewer also, is someone that searches something. This was your attitude, eh?
Yes, absolutely.
At the beginning it's more in a way contemplative. Also you install a sort of rhythm, but there is a sort of crescendo, a sort of explosion of images. Was the idea to create something other? Was at the beginning, or it was in working in this abstraction work that you did digitally, that finally you had the idea to create something?
You know, working on a film like this, in my case, was very intuitive. It was not a film or a project where you have an idea and you know exactly how you are going to do it and where it ends, and that you would submit to get film funding. No, this one was a completely free and independent process of developing something that I didn't even know where it would end. It is a very personal film because it represents my state of mind I was in when I started making this film, because I was also a little bit searching for the way that I want to develop as an artist, as a filmmaker. I wanted also to try something new, and my approach was always that I do the things as I feel they are right. So talking about the first, you called it crescendo, which is actually a crescendo because it's in the beginning the images are very silent, and I like to work a lot with sounds and with the dramaturgy that the sound creation can create. And for me it was clear from the very beginning, together with the sound artist Genuel von Lilienstern and Morten J. Olsen, that the biggest challenge in this film is to tell silence in the sound, because it's not easy to tell silence, because, for example, we are sitting here in a room and of course you can hear people talking in the background, but even if they would be out, you always have like a kind of noise. It can be a white noise, it can be a pink noise, but you have a frequency. And we knew that to tell silence, we need to break the silence from time to time, so that the silence becomes even more clear and present. And for that, the film has a very extreme dynamic between very silent parts and very loud parts that in the cinema here were like really loud. Yeah, so this was actually a big challenge, and you would not know how much human presence is always part in sound recordings. Like even in the desert, when I did sound recordings, also like with this, with a Zoom, with a microphone, you would always like hear far away, maybe an airplane or a car. It's almost impossible to record or to find sounds recordings which are completely clean, in the sense of that they are without any kind of human presence. To tell the silence, you need to break the silence. And for me it was clear that there are some points, some moments in the film that would create a huge contrast to the rest of the film.
How was concretely the work with the sound designer or the sound editors? Because I think it was one of the main part of the task of creating a dramaturgy.
I used to do everything by myself in my previous films. When I get to the point that I collaborate with people, then I don't want them just to do something technical. I really want them to be part of the creation. And Genuel, he was together with me in Los Angeles as part of this artistic residency. I really admire his work. It was like this. I gave him parts of the film, and I really said, okay, here it is. Try to see what you will do with it. We just agreed on the fact that the sound design should be like very precise, and there would be like very silent parts and very loud parts. And then he decided to bring in another artist, Morten J. Olsen. He's also a sound artist who works with percussions. So he was creating sounds that are on the border between artificial and natural. And we also did a very complex 7.1 mixing that we unfortunately couldn't present here in this cinema, but we were really using the space of cinema to explore what we can do to create the sound. The tunnel, I call it the infinity tunnel. This was something that came out of some ideas that I had to create a chaos. And then in the end, it was such a huge composition that just to render it out, it took like more than 2 days.
I have the impression that before this scene, this crescendo, we feel more the absence of man, and after we feel more the presence of nature.
I wanted to play with the expectation also of the viewer. Maybe it's a kind of hope that something better or new creates out of the destruction or that we have in this sequence, which is like, okay, pressing a reset button somehow. But just to destroy this illusion again, because you're right, it feels like first now the nature is somehow taking control again over this planet, or the nature will become the most present thing. But then step by step again, the traces of human presence come back. Suddenly you see a street again. It's impossible to find places on this planet where human beings haven't made. All places had a meaning to me in the last years when I made the film. The US part is like kind of dominant in the film, but also because I'm playing with my socialization of images, because for that we have this VHS layer in the film, which is also another part. The film consists of many like different, I would say, layers, like a composition. And of course it was my projection of America and also of Hollywood as a city that is not a place, it's a destination. And Berlin, it was just logical. It felt right to me to end in the city where I live, and also to have this like very hard contrast from this very beautiful nature to this very grayish and dark Berlin, because this is how most people would experience the city in most of the year, maybe apart from the summer. And the very last place in the film is probably the most personal place to me, because it's the flat of my grandmother, and I filmed those images after she died, and we had to empty her flat, and she lived there more than 50 years, I think. So the flat was like a museum. And this footage I filmed, I think in 2015. Yeah, she died in 2015. So I had no idea that one day this footage would make sense to bring it into a film that is called Die grosse Leere, the Great Void. And then I was talking to someone who told me, okay, this film would make sense in a gallery, but not in a cinema. And I say, no, it only makes sense in a cinema when you have this concentration of sitting together with the people and you really like stay focused on the screen. And another person told me that at some point she fell asleep, but she woke up again in this crazy sequence. So, and this is not a bad thing for me, you know. It's a kind of meditation. I really like that now you're with yourself. But with one exception, Brecht. Why Brecht? Because when I discovered his poem again, I was feeling like he's really addressing me in that moment. He wrote this poem just a few weeks before the Second World War started, and he was in exile in Denmark, and it's also the only recording that exists of his voice. He's starting also the poem with, we live in truly dark times. He's starting in the present, but he's also addressing those who follow us. And this was exactly the idea, that somehow the film is a document that addresses those who follow us, who would see like how we lived.
Ladies and gentlemen, you got him.
Everyone. Higher scores. Accurate up to...
I think this film particularly needs to be seen in the cinema, and I hope that some audience will have the chance maybe later this year to discover this work on another festival maybe, or in the cinema. Let's hope. I still think we really need to have the films in the cinema.